So I was really fascinated by the way it was very structured, right? So Django, if Django is a web framework of Python, so that was my first intro to Python. So I didn't start it from the other way around, like learning Python language and going to a framework, but I started the other way around, starting from a framework and later starting to learn the Python. So I was very much fascinated with the way the language is, and I think that's where my journey started. So starting from 2006, so if you basically see, it's like 2021, so it's more than a decade or more, like it's more than a decade, right? So I've been working on Python, writing multiple frameworks, maybe a lot of code that I have done in Python. So yeah, so I think that's about me. So let's move further ahead. So coming for Python, uh, so let's talk about why Python is in so much demand nowadays, right? Uh, so to start with, let me be very, let me tell you, like Python is not a recent language, right? So, but the good thing that has happened for Python is it has grown in multiple ways, right? So the support that we get through Python is very huge. So if you say like I started way back in 2006, whereas my mentor was doing Python way back from 1992, right? So if you see Python is as old as C, if you can say like Python has been there since a long time. So at least I know like it's been there since 1990s. Okay. So uh, just a minute, guys. Yeah, so I'm back. So Python has been there from a very long time. So I'll just walk you very quickly over why I would say Python is very much in demand. So if you basically look through, the first and the foremost thing that comes into Python is the simplicity. So I would say there is something called a syntactical sugar that is something that is very less in Python space. So you don't need to worry about the dollars, you don't need to worry about semicolons, you don't need to worry about a lot of other syntactical sugars. So which kind of makes you concentrate very much on the programming aspect rather than worrying about, okay, did I forget a comma, did I forget the semicolon? So those all kind of headaches, you don't get it. So yes, there are some things that you need to look into, that is more into the technical side of it. But if you say Python is a very simple language, more like English, right? So the next thing about Python is Python is an open source product. So when I say an open source product, so the open source in the sense it is a more of a community based project. You have the source code available outside, anybody can use it. You can tweak it to your needs, you can build your own company around that particular product, or you can get into the support, whatnot, right? So when I say it's an open source product, so it has a huge community of its own. So there's a big community around there where people actually start building a lot of things around it, right? So that is one of the benefits. The next part is the libraries and the framework. So if you see the total number of libraries that at least when I started in 2006 were hardly 5,000. Now, if you see in a span of last 3 to 4 years, they have grown around good like around 1 lakh. Okay, and so they're further growing. So if you see, people ask me like, where can I use Python? So the answer for that is very simple. I say like you can use Python everywhere or anywhere, anything under Skype, right? So there is a huge demand for every other areas where you can use Python. Okay, so you cannot be working on multiple domains, but whatever be the domain that you're working on, I think Python fits very much there. So I've seen people who have used Python in areas like system administration, cloud automation, data sciences, machine learning languages, web development, whatnot. Right. So even I have seen people using Python in the robotics. Right. Uh, so so that is the extent of the libraries and the framework that I see in for Python. Right. So the next part. is scripting and programming, right? There is a slight difference between scripting and a programming language. So when you ask about what is scripting and programming, so scripting is something where you write a small code and you can kind of use it for doing a small activity. But in future, if you want to scale it, right? So you need some modules, or you need a way wherein you can scale the program to the next level. So Python fits into both fields, right? So you can write small code which can fit for small activities, like you want to you want to write a small program which will go and kind of hit some APIs, or you want to write a program which can go and shut down some machines. You want to get to know, like, if a particular machine is up or not. So like you have 1,000 machines, you want to just go and check those. So those kind of small programs you can write. Or you want to write something like a Facebook, right? Or you want to do something like a Twitter, or you want to write something like a website like a Jiroda kind of a thing. So you can do all those kind of stuff using programming. So scripting is writing small programs. Programming is kind of having the ability to extend on top of it. So I just want to spend a couple of more minutes on scripting areas. So let's take, for people who don't know what is scripting, so I'll give you some examples. So in Linux, we have something called shell scripting, right? So the shell scripting, you can write small programs, but let's say you want to connect to a database and do some work, or you want to connect to a REST APIs, or you want to do some web-based programming. You can't do that. Same as in Windows, we have this PowerShell. So PowerShell is kind of a scripting language, not a programming language. Okay. Now, yeah. So let's go to the next one. So we have Python. The support for Python is also object-oriented. It's an object-oriented language. So I think 98 to 99% of the people live programming because of the object-oriented concepts. So I have seen people saying, okay, object-oriented is very hard, right? So Python basically supports modular programming, functional programming, and object-oriented programming. So it supports all the things which is needed for a programming language. But yes, having an uh, object-oriented programming is equally very important, and I will point out you what are the areas that we covered there. So the next part is the jobs in the group, obviously. So you learn something to have a growth in your career, or you basically land up into a job. I would say Python is one of those languages which will actually get you there, right? So there are other things like we have these other happening areas like data science, automation, robotic processing, like you call as web crawling, you call as machine learning, you call it NFP, natural language processing, web development. So these all are the areas where you can basically go ahead and you can use Python into, right? So I'll take a pause. So any questions there? Any questions? Anyone? Before I move to the next slide.
Yes, sir. Sir, I think as Amazon AWS services are also the same as I can see in machine learning, there is also machine learning and web development and data science and all. What's the difference between the Python and AWS then?
See, Python is a programming language, and when you basically call about AWS, right? So AWS is a cloud solution. So basically for the solutions and everything, for all the solutions and everything that you get in AWS, AWS is more of a cloud provider. Like you want a machine, or you want to set up a website, and there are a lot of features that AWS provides. But to build an engine like an AWS, let us say you want to build something as big as an AWS, you need something called as a programming language, right? AWS gives you some solutions, but they are not tailored to your needs. So let's say I give you, so in a very layman words, let's say like AWS gives you something, say like a bread, right? So you want to make something out of it. So let's say you want to add some vegetables to that, and you want to make it something to eat, right? So not every cloud provider or not every product that you're going to work tomorrow. Let's say we talk about anything. You talk about data sciences related stuff. You talk about machine learning algorithms. You talk about web development, whatnot, right? So not every other product comes with the full-fledged tools. So you need some way wherein you can tweak around it, and you can build your own tools around it, right? So for example, say I work very much in a cloud environment, right? So you talk about AWS. So when you talk about AWS, we work in AWS environment, but AWS doesn't provide all the things, or whatever the products it provides are sometimes not sufficient for our requirements. Okay, so we have to customize around it. So that's where a programming language comes into picture. So since we are talking about Python, so yeah, we use Python a lot to tweak our day-to-day needs and activities around any kind of solutions. So the AWS, what you're talking about, is one of the solutions. It's a cloud solution, right? So similarly, we have other solutions like web development. So they don't come with fully functional requirements for day-to-day activities. So we need to customize few of them. So that is where Python comes into. So I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys? So moving further ahead. So the certification roadmap is what I'll be walking you over, and I'll be basically showing you also the content that it is covered in each of these areas, right? So I think the certification program specifically for programming languages have been there from a very long time. So if you remember, like way back in 90s, we used to have this Java-based programming certification, right? So which used to be done by SunOS, right? Now basically it is Oracle. So there have been programming languages certifications in place, but if you say more or less, programming is all about logic. So even if I teach you programming, at the end of the day, how you write it is what matters, right? But at the same time, how do you basically tell that, okay, I know this much of Python, right? So to set that standard, so we have this certification program. So what the certification program does for you is, at a first glance, I get to know that, okay, this guy knows a bit of Python. So even though he says, okay, he knows Python, so I don't know to what level he knows Python, but I have a standard here. Like he has completed so and so certifications, and which contains so and so topics, which basically cover which basically say like whether the candidate is basically good in these areas, right? So if you see in the certification roadmap, you see Python Institute is an open education and development group, which is actually coming up with this program. So if you see at the very top, so there is an entry level, an associate level, and a professional level. So each of these things have a code. Like when you see PCEP, right? So it is called Python Certified Entry Level Python Programming Certification. So you can see the code at the top and the below explanation at the bottom. It's not hard to understand. Then we have PCAP. So PCAP stands for Python Certified Associate in Python. So we have the associate program. And then we have a professional program. So similarly, same thing, the Python Certified Professional in Python Programming Certification. So we have these 1, 2, 3, 4 programs, right? So this is a very basic layer of Python entry-level program, and this is kind of taken care by a certification authority called OpenEDG. They are actually the testing guys. So you can see the color thing. So for the basics, you basically have to go through OpenEDG. And for the rest all things like associate and the professional, we go through the authorized Pearson PUA testing centers. or on UV online. So online has been gaining popularity thanks to COVID. But yeah, so if you see this, these are the different levels of programming or the programming certification that I'll be walking you today, right? So any questions here before we go further? Any questions? Okay. I'll take it as no and I'll move forward. So we have this PSEP certified entry level Python programmer. So this is the entry level programming for us. And what we will do basically is we'll walk through this. So this is how the exam. So yeah, I forgot to show you something. So you can see there is something called code here. So there are multiple codes. You can see there is like 30, 31 and different codes. And if you see 30, 31, 32, 32, so those are the codes. Okay, so every Python program certification, what I'm going to show you here, will have a code of its own. Okay, so that is the code that will be coming to. Yeah, so this is the code. So this is PSEP 3001. So what this will be holding for us is some basic concepts. So to start with the basic concepts, it will be like what is an interpreter, what is a compiler, what is language elements, what are the syntaxes, those all kind of stuff. So those are basically your fundamental concepts that we'll be covering here. So Python, if you ask me, is it works both ways. You can actually use, it's more of an interpreter language when you basically talk about, and you can also use it for compilation basis also, right? And there are other things that we'll be talking about. So it has its own CLI and those kind of stuff, right? So then we have, so this is the exam block where you'll be covering some basic concepts, which will be like 17%, right? So then we'll be talking about data types. So coming to Python, we have like UTF 16 standard Unicodes. And we'll be basically be walking you over what are strings, what are Boolean operators, what are relational operators, how do you basically take an input, how do you print it, how do you take care of the data typing like int, float, string, length, whatnot. So these all kind of stuff we kind of have to cover in the exam block too. So this is more of the basics, right? And then we talk about list, tuples, and dictionaries, right? So, so let's talk about lists. So, what do you mean by lists? So, lists are basically a collection of data, and you can save similar data types, or you can save heterogeneous data types inside it. So, lists are basically for organizing your data inside the Python space. So there is one more concept which we have that we call as arrays. So arrays and lists are completely different as far as we are concerned with the data collections, right? Then next we have tuples, right? So tuples are very much like lists, but we don't want them to be modified. Like for example, you go to a website, like say we are going for some website called as Amazon. Okay, you want to buy a dress there. So one of the things that we don't want to modify, right? If you basically notice, we have male, female, and kids, right? So those are the three options that I basically don't want people to modify. Are those are the criteria on which my whole system works, right? So I don't want somebody accidentally modifying that data. So those are called as tuples. So then we come to the dictionary areas. So dictionaries are basically about um, a connection of, or you have a data and you want to interlink the keyword to the data space, right? So for example, your name is Santosh. There may be so many Santoshes, right? So I'll say Santosh W, right? So Santosh D. And when you see Santosh D is a key, is a unique data or a unique value, or let's say Santosh has a unique value called his Aadhaar identity number, and the Aadhaar identity number is linked to his education, it's linked to his salaries, it's linked to his having how many loans he has, how many accounts he has, everything, right? So that's basically what we call as dictionary. So this is the beginning thing as far as your Python is concerned, right? Then we have the control flow, guys. So the control flow is basically the loops and the conditions blocks. So the loops and the condition blocks are something wherein you have a conditional block. So this is where your Python will look something different uh, from what we have from what we have from other programming languages. So Python is the indented based language. So when I say indented based language, you don't have this curly brackets and everything. You have to deal with spaces and time. So that's where your conditions kind of are kind of different from other programming languages, and that kind of makes your Python language very much structured. So that's about conditional blocks. So the loops, so loops is something like you want to do a repetitive task. So basically you can do that using loops. So basically we have while and for. It's not as confusing as other programming languages. We have for each, while do, until to add to the confusion. So we don't have those all things in Python. So makes it very simple. We have only for and while, right? So the next or the final block, what we call is the functions. So you have a code, and uh, you basically have a code which is very much repetitive, and you want to call that at some point of time in your program. So that's called functions. So functional programming is something which is very, very important, and it is part of this Python curriculum training, right? Uh, so if you see in the functional thing, we'll talk about how to write your own functions, what is written, what is a yield keyword, what is none keyword. So there are some things called as iterators, generators. So we don't see iterators here, but basically your looping is, so we have a concept called iterators, generators, decorators. So everything comes under the functional based program, right? So what is parameters, what are arguments, what are positional keywords, so what are default parameter values. So there are a lot of concepts that we'll be covering in the functional areas. So the functional areas is all about how exactly you write a function block. So this basically consists of all your basics in PCP 3001. So so that's about your what we call as entry level Python programmer, right? This is the content. So any questions here before I go to the next level? So let me see. I've been getting some questions. Okay, I don't know how to check it here, but
Santosh, no
let
worries.
me
I
see.
I I have answered everyone's question, so you carry on.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So any questions in this certified entry level Python programmer concepts? Any doubts in any of these areas? Any questions that you want to ask? Okay. So in this exam, so this exam is conducted online. You can do it online, and this is by Open EDG testing service. So they basically give you you get a slot, and you get questions, multiple choice questions, and you can basically go ahead and write them. Okay. The only thing is when you open that exam, it should be the only thing that should be open on your system. So yes, it is more like you should not open any other browser or anything, but well, that's how you have to write it. So um, so it doesn't need a webcam or anything, but you can just open that and you can just start writing it. Okay, so that's about the exam. So then we'll go for the associate. So let me show one more thing. So if you see, there is a dotted line here, right? So it's not necessary that you have to do an entry level and you can directly jump into associate. But believe me, entry level is itself a very beautiful experience of getting into this programming concepts, right? So you get into this entry level, and then you get to the associate. So associate and professional are by this on UV, VUE online or VU testing centers, where you have somebody watching your system and watching you over a webcam, right? So you need to be very thorough with your subject before actually attempting these things. Okay, so let me cover those now. So coming to the associate programming, so the first part is we'll be covering around modules and packages. So when you talk about modules and packages, the modules and packages are like an extension to your functional based programming. So when you have a code and you write a block of code which is basically called a function, so what happens is you can basically go ahead and you can call that function multiple times. What about if I want to have a program which somebody else has written, or maybe I have written, which I want to share it to somebody so that they can start using it in their program right away? So that is what is called as modules and packages. So this was what I was trying to tell you guys early in the day. The number of packages that have grown large, right? So that is what we are going to cover here. So I just want to show you. I want to just take this thing to just show you something. Yeah. So if you see, this is the parent site. This is the python.org. If you basically go through, and there is something called PyPy here. This is called Python package index. Okay, so let me just click it. So if you see here in the Python package index, just have a look at this project. So it has around 3,07,455 projects. So that means there are so many modules that are there that we can use. So let's say like I'm talking about a very simple module called Excel sheet, or let's say like I want to write a program where I can connect to an AWS and do something. Okay. So you can see like there are so many modules where you can connect to an AWS platform, right? So when I talk about a Google Cloud, right? So I'm just giving you some examples. So people have already written this. Okay, so we can see like if this is really worth to us, you can go in depth and everything. So how to use this module, which module fits you. So these all is part of the curriculum, but basically speaking, you can basically walk into this and you can do a lot of stuff. So let's say you have an Excel sheet and you want to read the data from it using Python language. So yeah, you have so many modules already in place. So you can read from an Excel sheet. You can make make websites out of it. You can pull data out of it, whatnot, right? So so just wanted to show that. So I'll come back to where we were. Okay. So yeah. So this is your second one, the modules, what I was talking about. So you can see what is, so we will be learning about what is import, what is dir, what is sys.path. So this is very much more into the technicals. So, but yeah, we'll be covering all these things as part of the modules and packages. So the next part is exceptions. So as exception states, right? So you go to a web page and somebody asks you to fill up a form, right? So the first thing what I do is, without filling anything, what I do is I go and hit the submit button. So it shows me on the web page that what are the items which are mandatory that I have to enter. So given that somebody goes ahead and hits an submit and it kind of fades, right? So will you go back to that web page? No, right? So exceptions are something which are very common in programming space. So you don't expect something, or you feel that, okay, I have a program, I wrote a program, but there are chances that people will do it in a different way, right? So the chances of the programming fail. So that is where your exceptions come into picture. So we have this exception concept in Python where we have try except block. So so I'll be showing you how you will be basically doing this, right? Then we were doing a bit about strings. So strings more like basics, but yeah, as far as the certification program is concerned, they have put it into the associate level. So by default, we used to have Python 2, but now it is end of life. Now we have to only work on Python 3. So if you look into the Python 3 concepts, right? So the Python 3, you have something called as Unicode instead of string as the default, right? So Unicode means, let's say we have an A in Hindi or an A in Telugu, and how do you actually use that? So they have made it very much possible in Python 3.x. So your default value is basically Unicode with UTF-8 enabled, right? So yeah, how to play with the strings, what is indexing, slicing, why do we call them immutable, how can we iterate over a string, what is concatenation, multiplying, comparing, and these all things basically we are going to cover this in the string concept. Okay, so then we have this object oriented programming concept. So as I told, um, just like the function, this is functions basically starts your functional based programming, and the modules and packages basically start the modular based programming. Similarly, we have something called as object oriented programming. Now people do ask me a lot, do we really need to learn object oriented programming? The answer is a no. You don't need to basically do an object oriented programming, but you can achieve most of the things through functional programming or module based programming. But if you don't know object oriented programming, so treating unique cases will be somewhat hard, or your code will become humongous code, right? Your code will become very large. So yeah, even though object oriented programming is something which people try to run away, but yeah, object oriented programming is very much important. So the next question that comes is, do Python support all the object oriented programming concepts? The answer is a no, but yes, it covers most of them, right? So we have some concept called as API, right? So abstraction, polymorphism, inheritance, and encapsulation. So these are the basic concepts that we basically try to cover in object-oriented programming. So we do have that in Python, and yeah. So we also talk about something like inheritance. What is the difference between a class and an object? So many different other things are there. So that we'll be covering in this parts as far as object-oriented programming is concerned. So there are a few miscellaneous things like list comprehension. So even though we talk about list comprehension here, there are other comprehensions also, like dictionary comprehensions. So the list comprehensions is a quick way of creating lists without having to assign a value to that, right? So lambda is an extension to that. A map, filter, lambda are an extension to your list comprehensions, right? The list comprehensions plus functions together, that's where you basically fit to lambdas, right? So we have this also this concept called as input output operations. So like you have a file of data, like say you have 1 GB of file filled with data, and you want to basically go ahead and read that file and grab some data. So how do you do that? How do you write into your file, right? So those kind of stuff is what will be we need to cover in this miscellaneous topics. So yeah, so that kind of covers your associate level. So these are the topics that we have for the associate. So currently the certificate code is PCAP 3103. So 3103 is your a PCAP certification code, and the 3102 is available, but that is going to expire. So you basically need to go for 3103, right? So going back, yeah. So any questions on PCAP 31? Anyone? Okay, I'll take it as a no. So coming to the professional part, there are basically two certifications. One is PCPP 32.1 and PCPP 32.2. Okay, so I'll just quickly walk over them. Yeah, so this is called PCPP1, that is called Certified Professional in Python Programming 1. And So you can see that as it is a completely what you call as an advanced concept. So it starts basically with the object-oriented programming in Python. So it is good like 25% of questions, right? So we learn about concepts called as what is classes, what are inheritance, what are attributes, what are methods. We talk with working with classes and instances. So we have some concept called as shallow copy and deep copy. So it's basically a concept which we'll learn also in lists. But yeah, it's more an object-oriented concept. You can see inheritance and polymorphism. So inheritance is uh, so you get a property from your father, right? So that's basically inheritance. So your father is an doctor doesn't mean you become a doctor, right? So that's not an inheritance. Okay. So that's what we'll try to achieve in programming. So you write a code and you want to use that functionality in a different part of the code altogether. So how do you do that is what is called inheritance. Polymorphism. Polymorphism, the poly itself says is many, right? Morphism is forms, so many forms. So you are a son, you are a father, you are a husband, whatnot, right? So you have many forms. So similarly, when you write something, so your code can be behaving in multiple forms, right? In multiple area. Like let's take an example of a plus. So you can use a plus to add numbers, you can use a plus to add strings also, right? So it is being polymorphic. So how do you write polymorphic based code is something that we'll be learning. Abstract classes with method overloading. So we call it as functional overloading, right? So that's what we are basically looking here. Composite versus inheritance, implementation code syntax, subclassing. So these all are in one or the other way part of the core concepts that is called API, that is abstraction, polymorphism, inheritance, and encapsulation. Right. So that's basically a continuity of the object-oriented programming concepts that we will be going to learning in PCAP 3103 to here. Okay. So then we have this Python enhancement proposals. So we have something called as PEP standards. So Python enhancement proposals. So the Python community has come with some enhanced proposals, and one of the proposals for that basically is the PEP 8 and PEP 20 and PEP 257, which they want us to cover, right? So what are the principles that we need to follow while writing the code? How to write a beautiful code, that is PEP 8, right? And the PEP 257 is a docstring conversion. So docstring is something uh, where you write a code. So specifically, if you meet any programmer, right, if you ask him, do you do documentation? So you will see they'll make a lot of faces because a person who programs spending a time on the technical documentation is going to be very hard, right? So the PEP 257 is where we'll teach you basically how do you basically go ahead with writing a code in such a way that your code itself can be used as a documentation, right? So you can convert it into a doc. So that's what is PEP 257. But these are not the only PEP standards we have. So let me show you that again. So again, I come to python.org. So in python.org, if you basically go to the documentation, you see something called as PEP index, right? So just open this. So you can see these are all the PEP standards that we are going to see through. There are a lot of them. We cannot read all of them. So you have to read them with the ones which are relevant to your domain. But PEP 8 standard is one of the most popular ones. Okay, the style guide for Python code. So that is what we are actually covering here. Okay, the Python enhancement proposals. Okay, right. So the next part is GUI programming. So yes, so your Python supports GUI programming. So GUI programming is not about creating your web pages, but yeah, you want to create something like a calculator, or you want to create some Windows gadgets kind of a stuff, things. So those kind of stuff is also. So we have Tinker. Tickle programming is what we call as very popular. And good thing is yes, you can do games also in Python. So I have been in touch with people. I have trained people who have made careers in gaming concepts altogether, right? So we have built the Mario game over Python. So we have done those kind of stuff. So next is the elements of network programming working with RESTful APIs. So yeah, so most of the people do ask me like the RESTful APIs, like you collecting the data and everything, right? So you collecting the data. So for example, say in the current scenario, the government of India actually is releasing the data, right? So like how many patients are basically there, how many are getting affected, and those all things, right? So how is that happening? So I'll just give you a simple example. So you are affected with COVID. So your data is your Aadhaar card is basically taken in, your data is entered, so it goes into central database, right? But I cannot give you the database information to all of you guys, right? So what I will do is I'll give you a front end API. So you can hit the API. It's just like a web page URL. You just hit it and you pass some arguments to that, and you get the data from it. Like for example, say I want to know how many people are active in Telangana, or you people want to know how many people have recovered, right? So those kind of data and everything is coming from a central government. But how many websites we have? We have a lot of them, right? So that's called as REST APIs. So very powerful thing, the REST APIs. That is something that will be covered in these concepts, right? Then next, the other part is like network programming is also available. So here we can see like they are saying how to use and create sockets. So your WhatsApp is a socket-based programming, right? You're connecting from your system to your browser. So you type www.google.com. So that is a socket connection in the backend, right? So that is a network connection. So that is again part of your network programming. So, um, so for every of these operations that you do, right? So we use something called as CRUD operations. So CRUD is nothing but create, read, update, and delete. So you don't need to be doing it over a going into your database or doing something, but you'll be doing on a browser. So that's called as CRUD operations, right? So yeah, that's also covered here. Last but not the least, file processing. So you process files. So when I say a file, anything is a file, right? So a notebook is a file, a document is a file, an XML is a file, SQLite is a file, SQLite database is a file. So how do you deal with the files on a programming space is what is the example of file. That is file processing and communicating with program environment, right? So that's about your yeah. So I think Priyadarshini is actually responding to a couple of your questions in the back end, but once we are done, you can always post me those questions again. So that's about your 32101. And once this is done, we'll be having one more certified programming called Certified Professional in Python Programming 2. Okay. So any questions here, guys? Ah. So let's go to the next part. Okay. So creating and distributing packages. So if you see, I was kind of showing you something called as PyPy. So how do you? Yeah. So like we have these packages. So how do you install those packages? So we have a two.
Hey, we lost you.
We can do it using modules. So modules is something which we have covered in both the associate level and the professional level, and you can use it to build your own modules also. Like you can be a contributor to the community. So we have the documentation, we have the licensing. So how do you do those all stuff is what we'll teach you. So unit test and PyTest. So these are very beautiful parts of programming. So programming is not all about writing the program, right? So you write unit test cases basically to test your code. So for example, say I have some 2000 lines of code, or maybe say 10,000 lines of code, and I made some modification. to the code. Okay, and before I push it to the centralized location, maybe a Git or maybe a to production, I want to test it if it is really working. So that's what is called as a unit testing framework. So in a unit testing framework, if you if you don't write a unit testing framework on top of your code, right? So that is called as unit testing. The chances of your code failing is very much high, right? So nowadays, the unit testing is more popular than the actual program. So people write program, and right after the program, they have to write a unit test. So that is again something which is very popular space. Okay, so that is something that we are going to cover in PCPP 32. So then we have this design patterns. So design patterns is again an extension of your object-oriented programming concept. So you can see that object-oriented design principles and concepts of design patterns. So we have like singleton, we have factory model, we have packet, proxy, observer, command, template, whatnot, right? So there are so many things. So design patterns is not a new thing. Design patterns is there in all programming languages. You have to just Google it. So we'll be covering design patterns, which is a very in-depth about object-oriented concepts. Okay. So I'm not going to deep dive into this right now, but yeah, this is there. So we have interprocess communication. So something called as multiprocessing, threading, sub-process. So multiprocessing. So these are all something like you have a process. So how you assign your process to an underlying CPU is called as multiprocessing. Threading, or basically called as parallelism. So instead of doing ABC, you are going to run ABC simultaneously. So that is called as threading, right? So a simple example. So you have a WhatsApp group chat and you all are chatting in it. So that is called a multi-threading concept, right? So you have multiple people coming in, multiple threads open to the same server, and you are actually connecting them. So sub-process is again a module which is where you basically try to execute a command or something, right? So multiprocessing, it's very much related to the top one, what I just told you, queue, socket, and nmap. So something related to multiprocessing. So this is again more into generic programming, or you can. So when I talk about multiprocessing and threading concept, and sub-process, the three very much fall into the same category. Okay, kind of very much advanced. So Python network programming. So networking and programming, right? So these both are very much there from a very long time. Uh, just that very few people dive into this area. So nowadays you all might be hearing about something called as 5G, right? So most of your underlining hardware and everything is nothing but a VNF. It's a virtual network function, right? So all of those are kind of written in Python socket modules, right? So every function that we have been doing at a physical layer, like, can be handled over a programming layer or in a software layer. So that's basically what we are going to do in Python networking programming. So similarly, we have something called as databases. So I think here we are going to cover something called as Python MySQL database access, right? So this looks very basic, but we have different frameworks also around it. Something called as SQL Alchemy. So SQL Alchemy is a framework of databases, right? So if you're a database person, if you want to connect to a database, so you basically go around it. You have to learn the database. So you would have seen through this whole curriculum, right? So we haven't stopped just with the programming. We have covered a few other areas, like we have covered basics, we have covered functional programming, we have covered modular programming, we have covered object-oriented programming, we have covered a bit of networking, we have covered a bit of REST APIs, we have touched a bit of databases. So now you'll say, I'm not a database person, why do I need a database? No. So in a programming, when you get into becoming a programmer, you should be looking into multiple domains. Okay, so initially maybe you'll be covering multiple domains. So the web area, the database area, and the underlying network. At least the basics you'll be covering. So that's what this course is all about, right? So with this, I'm very much done. So if you have questions, anything related to the certification program, if you have any questions specific to Python, or if you have any questions, you can always post me. So yeah, there we go. You can open up and you can post me the questions, and I'll be very much happy to answer it to you guys.
Thank you very much, Santosh, for the insightful session. But here a request: do you have the questions that sample questions? You can, if you can show, or something is that. Santosh, yeah,
So
hope
yeah,
you
yeah.
heard
Sorry,
me.
I
Yeah.
was on mute. So you mean to say the sample questions for the exam is what you're saying?
Yes, if you have few, just yeah.
Yeah, I think it will be more like object oriented. So right now I don't have them handy, to be very honest. So if you have that, Priya, can you show them? Because I don't have them handy on the current system where I'm.
Right. That's the same thing happening. I also logged in from mobile, so
Okay.
no problem,
So I
guys.
think
As you are in the group chat, right? So there we will post it. So not to
okay.
worry. And we will post you the entire session that we have covered, the PDF that we will share with you, so that you can go back and look at it, the how it is, right?
Okay, I don't see the chat option. I think few people are posting the questions there. So
No problem. I have answered most of the things. Uh,
okay.
yeah. So just unshare your screen now. I will
Yeah,
let me
sure.
share.
Yeah, okay, sure. Thank you.
So here we have the if you want to prepare for the exam with more sample question, more practice questions, what we are going to give you in detail preparation of not only the entire Python curriculum for this certificate programmer, entry level programmer, also will provide you some guidelines and guidance how to appear the questions, and couple of sets of preparation questions, and we guarantee that for your, you will pass for with the certification. So that's the main I think that the exam you can take and you get certified and you can start a beautiful career in Python. So you can go and register here, and this event is organized. It's a full day workshop where you will code, you will learn more about Python, and get hands on with your own lab that we will give you. You can set up. We'll provide you programs or scripts or guidance how you can set up your own lab, and quickly you can start coding on using Python. This event is getting organized on July 3. So, anyone interested to join the full day workshop, you can register here and join hands with us to get certified. So the certification, as we have mentioned, is from the Open EDG people. They are the pioneer, or they are the only institute who are the certification provider in the world. Okay, so the certification really matters when you go for any career, right? As I said, and yeah, so that's mostly about it, guys. Okay, with that, I think we conclude the session. Yeah, thank you very much for your time, and appreciate your effort for joining here.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
And do follow our pages so that you can get up to date with our all content, future content. Let me share. once again, thank you everyone. Thanks for your time, and hope you have some insight. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Sir, and then having the last question.
yeah, Sampath, please go ahead.
If you want to do the entry level certification,
Mhm.
so is there any charges for it by doing for the completion of certification?
Yes, yes, Ravi, right? Ravi Teja, you are asking,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah. There
Yes,
is
sir.
they charge $60 to write the exam.
Okay.
That's the entry level price. Whereas the professionals and they are higher, like it is almost $300 to write the exam. So you can start with the entry level.
Okay, sir.